Chapter 1. The Discovery. The photograph cost $3. Sophia Martinez almost did not buy it. She stood in the crowded living room of the Bellmont estate sale on October 14, 2023, holding a dusty cardboard box filled with old family photographs, and seriously considered walking away. The asking price was reasonable for a collection this size, maybe 50 photographs total. But most were standard early 20th century family portraits. Nothing special, nothing valuable. Just dead people in stiff poses staring at cameras with the kind of grim expressions that came from holding still for long exposures. But something about one particular photograph kept pulling her attention back. It was larger than the others, roughly 8 by 10 inches, mounted in an ornate silver frame that was probably worth more than the photograph itself. The image showed a family of 5 posed in what appeared to be a formal parlor. Dated on the back, in faded pencil, June 1898, Bellmont family, Providence, Rhode Island. The father stood behind a velvet chair, one hand resting on his wife's shoulder. The mother sat holding an infant. 2 young children, a boy and a girl perhaps 7 and 9 years old, stood on either side. Everyone wore their Sunday best. Everyone looked directly at the camera. Everyone appeared calm, composed, proper. Sophia had been dealing in antiques for 11 years. She knew how to spot valuable pieces. She knew which old photographs collectors wanted. Victorian post-mortem photographs, Civil War-era images, unusual subject matter, celebrity connections. This photograph had none of those qualities. It was just an ordinary family portrait from 1898. Except something about it felt wrong. She paid the $3, added the box to her growing collection of estate sale purchases, and loaded everything into her van. The Bellmont estate was being liquidated after the last family member, 93-year-old Eleanor Bellmont, died without children. 4 generations of accumulated possessions sold to strangers for whatever price the market would bear. Sophia had been to dozens of these sales. They always made her slightly sad. All these objects that once meant something to someone, reduced to inventory. Back at her shop in downtown Providence, Sophia unpacked the photograph and set it on her workbench under the bright LED examination light she used for inspecting antiques. The frame was definitely valuable. Sterling silver, ornate Victorian design, probably worth $200 to the right buyer. She could separate it from the photograph, sell them individually, make a decent profit. But that wrong feeling persisted. She studied the image more carefully. The parlor was expensively furnished. Dark wood paneling, a large mirror on the wall behind the family, thick curtains framing a window, books on shelves, everything proper and Victorian. The father wore a dark suit with a high collar, severe expression, dark hair, dark beard, eyes that looked directly at the camera with unsettling intensity. The mother wore a high-necked dress with elaborate lace. Her expression was blank, almost vacant. The infant in her arms appeared to be sleeping or perhaps drugged, common practice for long photography exposures in that era. The 2 children stood rigid, the boy's face showing fear poorly disguised as composure, the girl's eyes wide and unblinking. Sophia had seen thousands of Victorian photographs. The stiff poses and grim expressions were normal for the era. Photography required long exposures. Subjects had to remain perfectly still. Smiling was rare. Fear was common, especially in children who did not understand the process. But this was different. This was not fear of the camera. This was fear of something else. She picked up her magnifying loupe and examined the photograph inch by inch. The paper was gelatin silver print, standard for 1898. The mounting was period appropriate. No signs of manipulation or forgery. Everything authentic. She moved across the image slowly. The father's hands, the mother's dress, the children's faces, the furniture, the books, the mirror on the wall, the mirror. Sophia stopped, leaned closer, adjusted the light. In the mirror's reflection, barely visible, almost lost in the grain and age damage of the photograph, she could see the back of the photographer, his camera on a tripod, his head beneath the dark cloth photographers used to compose their shots. And behind him, partially visible through the parlor doorway, something else. A small figure, child-sized, standing in the hallway, facing away from the mirror, arms hanging limply at their sides. Sophia felt her skin prickle. She adjusted the magnification on her loupe, trying to see more detail. The figure was blurry, indistinct, but definitely there. A child not included in the family portrait. A child standing alone in the hallway while the family posed. A child whose posture suggested something deeply wrong. She pulled out her phone and took several high-resolution photographs of the mirror reflection, then uploaded them to her computer and enhanced the contrast and sharpness. The image quality improved slightly. The figure became more distinct. She could see now that it appeared to be a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, wearing a light-colored dress. Her hair hung long and uncombed. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her arms, Sophia realized with growing unease, were not hanging limply. They were bound behind her back. She sat back from the computer screen, her heart beating faster. This could be nothing. A trick of light and shadow. Damage to the photograph, creating the illusion of something that was not there. Victorian photography was full of accidental double exposures, light leaks, developing errors that created ghostly images. But Sophia's instincts, honed by 11 years of evaluating antiques and spotting forgeries, told her this was not an accident. This figure was real. This child was in that house when the photograph was taken. And whoever took the photograph either did not notice her or chose not to mention her. She looked at the family in the portrait again. The father's severe expression, the mother's vacant stare, the children's fear, the sleeping infant, and now in the mirror's reflection a sixth child, bound, alone, hidden from the main composition but captured anyway by the unforgiving eye of the camera. Sophia picked up the frame again and carefully removed the photograph from its mounting. On the back, in addition to the date and family name, someone had written in different handwriting, much fainter, almost invisible, "God forgive us." She turned the photograph over and looked at the family again. 5 people posing for a portrait in June 1898. And one child, bound and hidden, visible only in reflection. The photograph that cost $3 suddenly felt much heavier. Sophia opened her laptop and searched for Bellmont family, Providence, Rhode Island, 1898. The search returned several results. Census records, property deeds, newspaper archives. She clicked on the first newspaper article, dated July 23, 1898, Providence Journal. The headline read, "Local family mourns tragic drowning of daughter." The article described how 11-year-old Catherine Bellmont had drowned in the Providence River on July 20, 1898, approximately 6 weeks after this photograph was taken. The death was ruled accidental. The family was described as devastated. No investigation was mentioned. Sophia looked at the photograph again. at the bound child in the mirror, at the father's severe expression, at the mother's vacant stare, at the children's fear, and she understood that she was not looking at a family portrait. She was looking at evidence of a crime that had been hidden for 125 years, preserved by accident in the reflection of a Victorian mirror. Waiting for someone to notice, Sophia did not sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table until 4 a.m, laptop open, surrounded by printed newspaper articles, census records, and hastily scrawled notes, following a trail of death that stretched across 3 decades. What she found made the bound child in the mirror look less like an isolated incident and more like the first piece of a pattern that someone had worked very hard to hide. Catherine Bellmont, 11 years old, drowned July 20th, 1898, ruled accidental. Thomas Bellmont Jr., 9 years old, died August 14th, 1901, from a fall down the basement stairs, ruled accidental. Mary Bellmont, 7 years old, died March 3rd, 1903, from accidental poisoning after consuming cleaning chemicals, ruled accidental. Infant James Bellmont, the baby in the photograph, died November 18th, 1904, age 6, from sudden illness. No investigation mentioned. 4 children. 4 deaths. All ruled accidents. All within 6 years. And no one, apparently, had thought this was suspicious. Sophia printed the death certificates from the Rhode Island State Archives digital collection. Each one signed by the same physician, Dr. Henry Caldwell, family doctor to the Bellmont household. Each one listing accidental death with brief descriptions that raised more questions than they answered. Catherine's drowning mentioned no witnesses. Thomas's fall had no explanation for why a 9-year-old would be in the basement alone. Mary's poisoning assumed a 7-year-old had somehow accessed locked cleaning supplies and consumed them voluntarily. James's sudden illness provided no specific diagnosis. At 6:30 in the morning, Sophia called her shop assistant and told her to handle the store today. Then she drove to the Providence Public Library, waited outside until it opened at 9, and headed straight for the local history archives. The librarian, an elderly woman named Margaret, who remembered Sophia from previous research visits, raised her eyebrows when Sophia requested everything they had on the Bellmont family of Providence, 1890 to 1920. The Bellmonts? That is an old Providence name, very prominent family. What is your interest? Antique photograph. I am trying to establish provenance. Sophia kept her voice casual, professional. No need to mention the bound child or the pattern of dead children. Not yet. Margaret disappeared into the back rooms and returned 20 minutes later with 3 archival boxes and a warning. Some of these documents are fragile. Handle them carefully. And everything stays in this room. No photographs without permission. Sophia opened the first box. It contained property records, business documents, and social announcements from the Providence Journal Society pages. Thomas Bellmont Sr. was a successful textile manufacturer, owner of Bellmont Mills, employing over 200 workers at the peak of production. He married Elizabeth Morrison in 1887. They had 5 children. Catherine, born 1887. Thomas Jr., born 1889. Mary, born 1891. James, born 1898. And one more, a name Sophia had not seen in any of the death records. Eleanor Bellmont, born 1893. No death date listed. Sophia stopped. Eleanor. That was the name of the last Bellmont. The 93-year-old woman whose estate sale had yielded the photograph. If Eleanor was born in 1893, she would have been 5 years old when the photograph was taken. She would have been alive when her 4 siblings died. She would have been the sole survivor. the oldest survivor, the one who lived while everyone else died. Sophia opened the second box, hands shaking slightly. This one contained newspaper clippings arranged chronologically. Society announcements, business news, charitable donations, the Bellmont family appearing regularly in Providence social circles, respected, admired, philanthropic. And then, starting in 1898, the obituaries began. Catherine's drowning received significant coverage. The Providence Journal ran a full article with details Sophia had not found in the death certificate. Catherine had been found floating in the Providence River near the family's summer property. She was discovered by a groundskeeper. She had been missing for 3 hours before her body was found. The family stated she had gone for a walk alone and must have fallen into the water. No witnesses, no investigation. But one detail caught Sophia's attention. The article mentioned that Catherine's younger sister, Eleanor, had been the last person to see her alive. 5-year-old Eleanor told police that Catherine had said she was going to meet father by the river. When asked why, Eleanor reportedly said, "Because she was bad again." Sophia read that line 3 times, "because she was bad again," implying this was not the first time, implying there was a pattern of punishment, implying Catherine's trip to the river was not voluntary. She continued through the clippings. Thomas Jr.'s death received less coverage, a brief obituary, accidental fall, tragic loss. The family requested privacy, no mention of any witness. But Sophia found a small article buried in the local news section from 2 days after his death. A reporter had interviewed neighbors. One neighbor, Mrs. Adelaide Porter, stated she had heard arguing coming from the Bellmont house the night before Thomas died. Loud voices, a child crying, then silence. When asked about this, Thomas Bellmont Sr. stated his son had been disciplined for misbehavior and sent to his room. The fall happened the next morning. Mary's death came 2 years later. The newspaper articles were brief: accidental poisoning, tragic accident. But Sophia found something else in the archives, a handwritten letter, filed with other miscellaneous Bellmont family correspondence, dated 2 weeks before Mary died. The letter was addressed to Elizabeth Bellmont, from her sister, Ruth Morrison, living in Boston. The letter was concerned. Ruth wrote that she was worried about the children. She wrote that during her last visit, Mary had seemed frightened and underweight. She wrote that Thomas Sr. appeared to have an excessive interest in discipline that borders on cruelty. She wrote that she wanted to take Mary back to Boston for an extended visit, to remove her from that environment. She wrote that Elizabeth must see what was happening and take action. Elizabeth's response, if there was one, was not in the archives. 2 weeks later, Mary was dead from accidental poisoning. Ruth Morrison attended the funeral. Sophia found no record of her ever visiting Providence again. Infant James died in 1904. Sudden illness, no specific diagnosis. The obituary was 3 lines. The family requested no visitors. By this point, the Providence Journal had stopped covering Bellmont family deaths with any detail. 4 dead children in 6 years had apparently become too routine to warrant extensive reporting. Sophia closed the second box and opened the third. This one contained financial records, wills, and property transfers. Thomas Bellmont Sr. died in 1918, age 57, from a heart attack. His will left everything to his wife Elizabeth and surviving daughter Eleanor. Elizabeth died in 1929, age 64, from pneumonia. Her will left everything to Eleanor. Eleanor Bellmont never married, never had children, lived in the family home at 247 Benefit Street, Providence until her death in 2023. 93 years old, the sole survivor of a family that lost 4 children to accidents within 6 years. Sophia sat back in her chair, staring at the archival boxes. The pattern was clear. 4 children died. All ruled accidents, all occurring after episodes described as punishment or discipline. All witnessed or discovered under suspicious circumstances. And 1 child, Eleanor, survived. The youngest daughter. The one who was 5 years old when the photograph was taken. The one who would have been too young to be blamed, too young to be punished, young enough to watch and remember everything. Margaret, the librarian, approached. "Finding what you need?" "Yes." Sophia's voice was quiet. "Can I get copies of these documents, especially the letter from Ruth Morrison and the newspaper articles about Catherine's death?" "For a fee. I will need to verify you are using them for legitimate historical research." "I am researching a murder." Sophia looked up at Margaret. 4 murders, committed by a respected Providence businessman between 1898 and 1904, covered up as accidents, hidden for 125 years. Margaret's expression shifted from polite professionalism to sharp interest. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" Sophia pulled out her phone and showed Margaret the enhanced photograph of the mirror reflection. The bound child in the hallway. The terrified children posing for the camera. The vacant-eyed mother. The severe father. This photograph was taken in June 1898. 6 weeks later, the oldest daughter drowned. Before she died, she told her 5-year-old sister she was going to meet father by the river. Because she was bad again. "I want to find out what happened to the girl in the mirror. Because I do not think she was the first." Margaret stared at the photograph for a long moment. Then she said, "I will make copies of everything, no fee, but you need to share what you find. This is Providence history. If what you are suggesting is true, people need to know." Sophia gathered the copied documents, thanked Margaret, and left the library. It was 2 in the afternoon. She had not eaten since yesterday. She did not care. She drove back to her shop, locked the door, put up the closed sign, and spread everything across her workbench. 4 dead children. 1 bound child in a mirror. 1 survivor who lived 93 years alone. And 1 photograph that captured evidence of a crime no one investigated. Sophia looked at the photograph again. At Eleanor, 5 years old, standing between her siblings, the only child who would survive. And she wondered what Eleanor had witnessed, what she remembered, what she carried for 93 years without telling anyone. Because Sophia was certain now. Eleanor knew. Eleanor had always known. And somewhere in that estate sale, among the boxes and furniture and decades of accumulated possessions, there might be evidence that Eleanor had left behind, waiting for someone to find it. The Bellmont house at 247 Benefit Street had been sold 3 days after the estate sale. Sophia found this out from the realtor's website at 7 in the morning, coffee growing cold beside her laptop, eyes burning from lack of sleep. The house had sold to a couple from Massachusetts who planned extensive renovations. Demolition was scheduled to begin next week, which meant Sophia had approximately 5 days to find whatever Eleanor might have left behind before it was destroyed or buried under new construction. She called the realtor at 9. Professional voice. Antique dealer. Needing to verify provenance on an item purchased from the estate sale. possible additional items of value might remain in the house. Could she arrange one final walkthrough before the new owners took possession? The realtor was skeptical. The estate sale cleared everything of value. The house has been emptied. Not everything. Sophia kept her voice casual. Old houses like this often have hidden storage, false walls, sealed-off closets, attic spaces. I have found valuable items in places estate sale companies miss. If there is anything left, it belongs to the estate, not the new owners. I can provide proper documentation and ensure you receive appropriate finder's fees. Money changed the realtor's tone. I can give you 2 hours this afternoon, 3 o'clock. Do not touch anything structural. Photographs only. If you find something valuable, we discuss terms before removal. Sophia arrived at 247 Benefit Street at 2:45. The house was a 3-story Victorian mansion, brick facade, slate roof, exactly the kind of imposing structure wealthy industrialists built in the 1880s. The realtor, a thin man in an expensive suit, who introduced himself as David, unlocked the front door and immediately began explaining the new owner's renovation plans. Sophia nodded politely and stopped listening. She was looking for spaces that did not make sense, rooms that felt too small, walls that seemed too thick, doors that led nowhere. In 11 years of dealing with Victorian houses, she had learned that wealthy families often built hidden storage for valuables, private spaces for activities they did not want servants to see, and sometimes places to hide things they did not want found. The first floor yielded nothing. Parlor, dining room, kitchen, library, all stripped bare by the estate sale. Empty rooms with marks on the walls where furniture had stood. The second floor contained 6 bedrooms, similarly empty. But in the hallway, Sophia noticed something. The space between 2 bedrooms felt wrong. The hallway was 12 feet long. The 2 bedrooms, based on window placement from outside, should have consumed all that space. But measuring with her eyes, there was a gap. Roughly 3 feet of space unaccounted for. This wall. Sophia tapped the section between the bedrooms. What is behind this? David checked his phone, scrolling through the property listing. Utility access, plumbing, and electrical. 3 feet of utility access? Old houses have thick walls. It is probably structural. Sophia ran her hand along the wallpaper, looking for seams, inconsistencies, places where the pattern did not quite match. Victorian builders often covered hidden doors with wallpaper that blended seamlessly when closed. Her fingers found something. A vertical seam, almost invisible, running floor to ceiling. She pressed gently. The wall flexed slightly. This is not structural. This is a door. David frowned. The property inspection did not mention any hidden doors. Because they did not look carefully. Sophia examined the seam more closely. No visible hinges. No handle. But at waist height, she found a small wooden panel that moved when pressed. Behind it, a simple latch mechanism. She lifted it. The door swung inward with a dry creak, revealing a narrow space barely wide enough for one person. Not a utility closet. A hidden room. David stepped forward, pulling out his phone flashlight. What the hell is this? Sophia entered first. The space was approximately 3 feet wide and 8 feet deep, with a small window at the far end, covered by thick curtains. The window faced an interior courtyard, invisible from the street. The room contained no furniture except a narrow wooden chair and a small writing desk. The walls were bare plaster. The floor was unfinished wood. And everything was covered in a thick layer of dust that showed no footprints. No one had entered this room in years, possibly decades. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal, a pen, and a single photograph in a frame. Sophia approached slowly, her heart hammering. She picked up the photograph first. It showed a young girl, maybe 16 years old, standing in a garden. The girl's face was serious, her posture stiff, her eyes looking directly at the camera, with an expression that was familiar. Sophia recognized those eyes. She had seen them in the 1898 family portrait. This was Eleanor Bellmont, photographed sometime around 1909, roughly 5 years after her last sibling died. She set the photograph down and opened the journal. The first entry was dated January 1st, 1920. Eleanor would have been 27 years old. The handwriting was precise, controlled, feminine. The first line read, "I am writing this because no one else will. I am writing this because they are dead and I am not, and someone must know what Father did." Sophia felt her breath catch. She turned pages carefully, scanning entries. The journal covered 40 years, from 1920 to 1960, written sporadically. Some years had monthly entries, some years had only 1 or 2, but every entry returned to the same subject. What Father did, what Mother allowed, what Eleanor witnessed and could not stop and never spoke about until everyone else was dead and she was alone, and finally safe enough to write it down. She read one entry dated March 1922. "Catherine was the first I remember clearly. I was 5 years old. Father called it discipline. He said she was willful and disobedient and required correction. He took her to the river house. She was gone for 3 days. When she came back, she could barely walk. Her arms were bruised. She would not speak. 2 weeks later, she drowned. Father said it was an accident. Mother said nothing. I knew even then that it was not an accident. I knew Catherine chose the river because it was better than what Father would do next." Another entry, July 1923. "Thomas was different. Thomas fought back. He was 9 years old and he fought. Father took him to the basement. I heard the sounds, the thuds, the crying that stopped too suddenly. The next morning, Thomas was dead at the bottom of the stairs. Father said he fell. The doctor said he fell. No one asked why a 9-year-old boy would be in the basement in the middle of the night. No one asked about the bruises." September 1924. "Mary lasted longest because she learned to be invisible. She was small and quiet and stayed out of Father's way. But eventually, she was not invisible enough. Eventually, Father decided she needed discipline too. The morning she died, I found her in the kitchen. She had drunk an entire bottle of cleaning chemicals. Her face was twisted in pain. Father said it was an accident. I knew Mary chose poison because Father had told her the night before that he was taking her to the river house. Like Catherine, Mary chose poison instead." December 1925. "Baby James was different. James was too young to be disciplined, too young to be willful. But James was sick often and cried frequently, and Father hated crying. One morning James would not stop crying. Father took him to the nursery. The door closed. The crying stopped. When Mother checked an hour later, James was dead. Sudden illness, the doctor said. I was 12 years old. I knew what sudden illness meant." Sophia turned more pages, hands shaking. Entry after entry describing Thomas Bellmont Sr. as a man who believed children required harsh discipline, who took them to isolated locations, who hurt them systematically, who killed them when discipline failed. And Eleanor, the youngest, the one who survived, describing how she stayed alive by being perfect, by never crying, by never disobeying, by making herself so small and quiet and obedient that Father had no reason to discipline her. One entry near the end, dated November 1960. Father has been dead 42 years. Mother has been dead 31 years. I am 67 years old, and I have never told anyone what happened. I have never married. I have never had children. I could not risk becoming like them. I could not risk doing to a child what Father did. So I lived alone. I stayed in this house because selling it would mean someone else living here. And I could not allow strangers to live in the rooms where my siblings died. This house is a tomb. I am its last ghost. When I die, maybe the truth can die with me. Or maybe someone will find this journal and finally understand that we did not all die from accidents. We died because Father killed us, and I survived because I learned how to disappear. Sophia closed the journal carefully. David stood in the doorway, his face pale. Jesus Christ, is that real? Yes. Sophia's voice was steady, despite the trembling in her hands. This is a confession, written by the sole survivor of systematic child abuse and murder, hidden in a room no one knew existed. Eleanor Bellmont lived 93 years carrying this truth alone. She looked at the journal, the photograph, the empty room. Eleanor had not destroyed this evidence. She had hidden it, but not destroyed it. She had written it down and left it here, in this house, in this room that no one would find unless they looked carefully. A message in a bottle thrown across time, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to care. We need to call the police. David's voice was uncertain. This is evidence of historical crimes. This is proof. Sophia picked up the journal carefully. And we need to document everything before this house is demolished. Because Eleanor Bellmont left this here for a reason. She wanted someone to find it. She wanted someone to know. And now someone does. The Providence Police Department. Historical Crimes Division consisted of one detective, a basement office, and a filing cabinet that smelled like mildew and forgotten cases. Detective Sarah Chen listened to Sophia's story for 47 minutes without interrupting. Then she read Eleanor's journal for another 30 minutes, while Sophia sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair across from her desk and watched the detective's expression shift from skepticism to growing horror. When Chen finally looked up, her voice was quiet and controlled. This is the most detailed confession of historical child abuse I have ever seen. But you understand the problem. Everyone involved is dead? Sophia had spent the last 2 days researching exactly this problem. Thomas Bellmont Sr. died in 1918. Elizabeth Bellmont died in 1929. Eleanor died last month. There is no one left to prosecute. Correct. And historical crimes beyond a certain threshold become academic rather than criminal matters. We document them. We acknowledge them. But we cannot bring charges against dead people. Chen tapped the journal. However, this deserves investigation. Eleanor mentions other children, the girl in the photograph, the bound child. That suggests victims beyond the 4 siblings. If we can identify additional victims, we might be able to provide closure to descendant families who never knew what happened. She pulled out a notepad. Let me walk through what we know. You found a photograph dated June 1898, showing the Bellmont family. In the mirror reflection, you identified a bound child who was not part of the family portrait. 6 weeks later, the oldest Bellmont daughter, Catherine, drowned under suspicious circumstances. Over the next 6 years, 3 more Bellmont children died in incidents ruled accidental, but described in Eleanor's journal as murders by their father. Eleanor survived by making herself invisible. She lived 93 years alone and left a detailed written record of the abuse hidden in her house. That is your evidence chain? Yes, but there is more. Sophia pulled out her laptop and opened the enhanced photographs of the mirror reflection. The bound child in the hallway is not one of the Bellmont children. I have identified all 5 siblings: Catherine, Thomas, Mary, James, and Eleanor. The bound child is someone else. Someone who was in that house in June 1898 but was not included in the family portrait. Chen studied the images. Could be a servant. Wealthy families employed domestic staff. If Thomas Bellmont was abusing his own children, he might have abused staff members' children too. That was my thought. So I checked the 1900 census records for the Bellmont household. Sophia opened another file. Thomas and Elizabeth Bellmont employed 4 live-in servants: a cook, a housekeeper, a nanny, and a groundskeeper. The cook and housekeeper were unmarried. The groundskeeper was male, 62 years old. But the nanny, a woman named Margaret Flynn, had a daughter, age 10 in 1900. Name was Alice Flynn. Chen leaned forward. Is there a photograph of Alice Flynn? No, but I found something else. Sophia opened a newspaper article from the Providence Journal, August 1898. 2 months after the Bellmont family portrait was taken, Margaret Flynn abruptly quit her position and left Providence. No forwarding address, no explanation. The article mentions it was unusual because the Bellmonts were known as good employers and paid well. Margaret's departure was so sudden, she left behind several months of wages uncollected. And her daughter Alice? No record. Alice Flynn disappears from all documentation after 1898. No death certificate, no census records, no marriage records, nothing. She was 10 years old in June 1898, and then she simply vanishes. The office was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Chen opened her laptop and began typing, pulling up historical databases. If Alice Flynn died in Providence in 1898, there should be a death certificate. Rhode Island has complete records for that period. They searched for 20 minutes. No death certificate for Alice Flynn in 1898, 1899, or 1900. No burial record. No obituary. Chen sat back in her chair. 2 possibilities. Either Alice Flynn left Providence with her mother and lived her life somewhere else under a different name, or Alice Flynn died and her death was never officially recorded. Eleanor's journal mentions other children. Sophia found the relevant passage and read aloud. Father took children who would not be missed. Staff children. Poor children from the docks. Children whose parents worked for father's mills and could not refuse when father offered to educate them or mentor them. They would come to the house. Sometimes they left. Sometimes they did not. No one asked questions because father was wealthy and respected, and no one questioned wealthy, respected men. Chen's expression hardened. How many? Eleanor does not give specific numbers. She was 5 years old when it started, young enough that her memories are fragmentary. But she mentions at least 3 children beyond her siblings. Alice Flynn was one. There were others. Where did he take them? The River House. Eleanor mentions it repeatedly. A property the Bellmonts owned outside Providence, on the river. Isolated. No neighbors. Thomas Bellmont called it the Discipline House. He took children there when they needed correction. Some came back, some did not. Chen searched property records. The Bellmonts owned a summer property purchased in 1892 on the Seekonk River, roughly 6 miles north of Providence. Sold in 1919, 1 year after Thomas Bellmont died. Current owners have renovated extensively. Original structure was demolished in 1975 and replaced with a modern house. So any physical evidence is gone? Probably. But I want to search the area. Bodies do not always disappear. If Thomas Bellmont killed children at that property, he had to dispose of them somewhere. Rivers, woods, burial on the property. Ground-penetrating radar might find something if we know where to look. Sophia hesitated. This is a lot of resources for a historical case with no surviving perpetrators. This is justice. Chen's voice was firm. Eleanor Bellmont left that journal because she wanted someone to know what happened. She wanted her siblings' deaths acknowledged as murders, not accidents. She wanted Alice Flynn and the other victims to be remembered. Historical crimes do not stop being crimes just because everyone involved is dead. We owe it to those children to find the truth. She stood up. I need to present this to my supervisor. This will require authorization for a full historical investigation. Possible excavation at the river property site if the current owners consent. Media attention will be significant. Providence's history includes dark chapters, but systematic child murder by a prominent industrialist is going to generate intense interest. Are you prepared for that? Sophia thought about the photograph. The bound child in the mirror. Eleanor's 93 years of silence. 4 siblings who died too young. Alice Flynn, who vanished without a trace. All of them waiting for someone to notice, someone to care. Yes, Eleanor left this for someone to find. She wanted the truth known. I am just the person who found it. But those children deserve to have their stories told. Chen nodded. I will start the paperwork. Meanwhile, I need you to document everything. Every photograph, every document, every piece of evidence. Chain of custody is important even for historical cases. And Sophia? She met Sophia's eyes. Thank you for not walking away from this. Most people would have sold that photograph, taken the profit, and never looked deeper. You gave those children their voices back. Sophia left the police station at 6 p.m, exhausted but unable to stop. She drove back to her shop, spread the photographs across her workbench again, and looked at the Bellmont family one more time. The father's severe expression. The mother's vacant stare. The children's fear. And in the mirror, barely visible, the bound child who started everything. She picked up her magnifying loupe and examined the mirror reflection again, looking for details she might have missed. The bound child's dress, her hair, her posture, and then she saw something that made her blood freeze. On the wall behind the bound child, partially visible, was a shelf. On the shelf were several objects, books, a vase, and something else, something small and cylindrical. Sophia increased the magnification as far as the image quality allowed. A jar. A glass jar containing what appeared to be small white objects. She enhanced the image digitally, increasing contrast, sharpening edges. The objects in the jar became clearer, not stones, not shells, something organic, something that looked distinctly like... Sophia grabbed her phone and called Detective Chen. I found something else in the photograph, in the background, behind the bound child. There is a shelf with a jar on it. The jar contains what appears to be teeth. Children's teeth, multiple teeth, like a collection. Chen's voice was very quiet. Send me the enhanced image immediately. Sophia sent it, waited. 5 minutes later, Chen called back. "That is a jar of children's teeth. I have seen similar collections in historical serial killer evidence, trophies, proof of what they had done. If that jar existed in 1898, it might still exist somewhere. In the estate sale items, in storage, hidden in the house. We need to find it. Because if we find that jar, and if those teeth can be analyzed, we might be able to identify victims through DNA and dental records." The house is scheduled for demolition in 3 days. Then we have 3 days to search every inch of that house before the evidence is destroyed. I am calling my supervisor right now. We are opening a full investigation. Historical Crimes Unit, forensic team, everything. Those children waited 127 years for justice. We are not making them wait any longer. They found the jar at 2 a.m. on the 3rd day. Detective Chen's forensic team had been searching the Bellmont house for 73 hours straight, working against the demolition deadline. They had examined every wall cavity, every floorboard, every sealed space in the 3-story mansion. Ground-penetrating radar had scanned the basement. Cadaver dogs had searched the property. Structural engineers had mapped hidden rooms and false walls. And nothing. No jar, no additional evidence. Just Eleanor's journal, the photograph, and a growing frustration that they might be too late. Sophia had not left the house since the investigation began. She sat in the empty parlor, surrounded by crime scene equipment and evidence markers, watching forensic techs work through the night. 3 days without sleep, living on coffee and determination. Knowing that somewhere in this house, Thomas Bellmont had hidden proof of what he had done. Knowing that Eleanor had lived here for 93 years, possibly knowing where it was hidden, unable or unwilling to reveal it. At 1:47 in the morning, a forensic tech named Marcus called out from the basement. "Detective Chen, you need to see this." They found Marcus in the coal cellar, a dark, brick-lined space that had not been used since the house converted to oil heating in the 1960s. The coal chute was sealed. The walls were black with decades of coal dust. And in the back corner, behind a loose brick, Marcus had found a small iron safe, roughly 1 foot square, covered in rust and corrosion. "It was hidden in the wall cavity," Marcus explained, shining his flashlight on the exposed safe. "The brick was loose. When I removed it, I found this. No lock visible. The corrosion has sealed it shut. We will need cutting tools." Chen nodded. "Get the safe upstairs. I want proper lighting and documentation before we open it." They carried the safe to the first-floor parlor, set it on a protective tarp, and photographed it from every angle. Then a forensic tech with metal-cutting tools carefully began working on the corroded edges. It took 40 minutes. The safe was not designed for security, just privacy. A simple household safe from the late 19th century, meant for storing documents or small valuables. The kind of safe a wealthy man might keep in his home office. When the door finally opened, Detective Chen used gloved hands to remove the contents. A leather-bound ledger, several sealed envelopes, a small wooden box, and a glass jar, approximately 6 inches tall, with a metal screw-top lid green with corrosion. Inside the jar were teeth, 27 of them, small, white, clearly from children. The room went silent. Chen set the jar down carefully on the evidence table, her hands shaking slightly. "Document this. Photograph from every angle. Then we get this to the forensic lab immediately. DNA analysis on every tooth. We identify these victims." She opened the ledger. The first page was dated 1891 and written in Thomas Bellmont's precise handwriting. The heading read, Discipline Records. Below that, a list of names, dates, and brief descriptions. Sarah Morrison, age 8, daughter of mill worker. June 1891. Required severe correction for theft. River House, 3 days. Successful rehabilitation. Peter O'Brien, age 9, son of dock worker. September 1891. Insubordinate and willful. River House, 2 days. Did not survive correction. Margaret Flynn's daughter, Alice, age 10, August 1898. Witnessed incident with Catherine. Required permanent correction. River House. Did not survive. The list continued. 12 children over 7 years. 5 listed as successful rehabilitation. 7 listed as did not survive correction. Chen's voice was barely audible. He kept records. He documented every child he took, every session of torture he called discipline. He wrote it down like a business ledger. Children as inventory. Abuse as accounting. Sophia leaned over Chen's shoulder, reading the entries. Each one brief, clinical, devoid of emotion. Each one describing the systematic torture and murder of children, whose only crime was being vulnerable. Poor children. Children of people who worked for Bellmont and could not refuse when he offered to mentor their sons and daughters. Children who disappeared and were ruled runaways or accidents or simply forgotten, because their families had no power to demand investigation. The sealed envelopes contained hair. Locks of hair from each victim, labeled with names and dates. Trophies like the teeth. Physical proof of what Thomas Bellmont had done. Evidence he kept hidden in his basement, probably visiting periodically to admire his collection, to remember his power over those children. One envelope was labeled differently. Eleanor Bellmont, age 5, 1898. Inside was not hair, but a handwritten note in a child's uncertain penmanship. I will be good. I will not tell. I promise I will not tell. Chen held the note carefully. He made her write this, after she witnessed Alice Flynn's murder or Catherine's abuse. He made 5-year-old Eleanor write a promise to stay silent. And she kept that promise for 93 years. Not entirely. Sophia thought about the hidden journal, the photograph left in the estate sale, the room preserved exactly as Eleanor had left it. She kept silent while Thomas Bellmont was alive, but she documented everything. She preserved the evidence. She made sure that someday, somehow, someone would find the truth. This was her testimony. Delayed by 93 years, but still a testimony. The forensic team worked through the night. DNA extraction from the teeth. Analysis of the hair samples. Cross-referencing names from the ledger with missing persons reports from 1891 to 1898. By morning, they had identified 6 of the 12 victims through genealogical DNA databases. 6 children whose descendant families could finally know what happened. Peter O'Brien, age 9, reported missing, September 1891. Family told he ran away. Body never found. Alice Flynn, age 10, disappeared August 1898. No missing persons report ever filed because her mother fled Providence in shame and fear, believing her daughter had been kidnapped, but unable to prove it. Samuel Green, age 7, son of mill worker, disappeared October 1893. Ruled a drowning. Body never recovered. 3 others identified through dental records and DNA matches to living descendants. Children whose families had carried the mystery of their disappearance for over a century, passing down stories of sons and daughters who vanished without explanation. Detective Chen held a press conference on November 2, 2023. She stood in front of the Bellmont house, now surrounded by crime scene tape, and read a statement that would dominate Providence headlines for weeks. After a 3-day investigation prompted by evidence discovered in a historical photograph, the Providence Police Department has confirmed that Thomas Bellmont Sr., a prominent textile manufacturer who died in 1918, was responsible for the systematic torture and murder of at least 12 children between 1891 and 1904. The victims included his own 4 children and 8 children from working-class families employed at his mills. Evidence recovered from the Bellmont residence includes detailed records of the crimes, physical trophies, and a written testimony from Thomas Bellmont's sole surviving daughter, Eleanor Bellmont, who died last month at age 93 after living with the knowledge of these crimes for her entire life. We are working with forensic genealogists to identify all victims and provide closure to descendant families. The media firestorm was immediate. Providence's dark history exposed. A respected historical family revealed as a facade hiding monstrous crimes. Descendant families demanding apologies, acknowledgement, justice, even though the perpetrator had been dead for over a century. But beneath the headlines and press conferences, something quieter happened. Families who had carried the mystery of missing children for generations finally received answers. Grave markers were erected for victims whose bodies were never found. Eleanor Bellmont's journal was published with permission from the estate, her testimony finally heard after a lifetime of enforced silence. And in her antique shop, Sophia Martinez placed the 1898 family photograph in a position of honor. Not for sale, not for profit, just preserved as evidence that sometimes justice arrives late, but still arrives. That sometimes the dead can speak if someone listens carefully enough. That sometimes a $3 photograph from an estate sale can change everything. The bound child in the mirror had finally been seen. Alice Flynn's name was known. Eleanor Bellmont's silence had been broken. And 12 children who died in darkness were finally brought into light. 127 years after Thomas Bellmont took his first victim, the last victim, the one who survived, had her revenge. Eleanor had waited until everyone was dead, until she was safe, and then she left the evidence where someone would find it. Patient, deliberate, knowing that justice delayed is still justice, knowing that truth always surfaces eventually, even if it takes over a century. The Bellmont house was demolished 3 weeks later, but the story remained, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting, preserved in a photograph no one was supposed to examine too closely, hidden in a basement safe behind a loose brick, waiting for someone to notice, someone to care, someone to give voice to children who could not speak for themselves. Sophia stood outside the demolition site, watching the old mansion come down, and thought about the $3 she almost did not spend. The photograph she almost walked away from, the evidence she almost missed. And she understood that sometimes the smallest decisions change everything. Sometimes noticing what others overlook means the difference between silence and justice. Sometimes a reflection in a mirror speaks louder than anything else. The house fell. The dust settled. And 12 children, silent for over a century, finally had their names spoken aloud and their stories told.